Welcome to the podcast. This podcast is entitled, Is Trump Like Hitler? Ever since Trump came on the political scene, we've been hearing this occasionally, and people will compare his rallies to a Nazi rally, or some of the things he says to, I guess, what Hitler said, calling him a fascist and stuff like that. So it intrigued me to compare them, and let's see if there are similarities or a lot of similarities. So first of all, I'll kind of explain how Hitler came to power briefly and some of the things he did, and then parallel them with Trump if we can. You know, anytime you compare someone to Hitler, it's crazy, and I wouldn't be doing this, but people are doing it. So that's why I'm just actually analyzing it with historical facts. So here we go. So Hitler came to power in 1933. That's when he became the Chancellor of Germany. A chancellor is kind of like a prime minister. In a parliamentary system, the people elect a parliament, and then they elect a leader over that parliament. And usually there's a president or a king or queen kind of alongside them, technically above them. They're the head of state, the president or the king or queen. And the leader of parliament, the chancellor or the prime minister, runs the government. In the United States, it's all one person, the president. The president is the head of state, and the president is the head of the government. So just understand, that's what Hitler became in 1933, was the Chancellor of Germany. So he became, in January of 1933, he became the Chancellor. So you might think, well, how long did it take him to get his program rolling to become dictator and enact all of his Nazi ideas? Took him about 2 months. One of the crises that he took advantage of was the Reichstag burning down. So the Reichstag was their Capitol building. They have rebuilt it since. You can Google it and see what it looked like and what it looks like now. So he blames the communists, takes advantage of this, and uses it to start seizing power. He was already trying to seize power, but this really jumpstarts that and gives him an excuse. So he bans the Communist Party and arrests all their members of parliament. They had quite a few members of parliament, and the Nazis were anti-communist. They saw the communists as a threat to Germany, and they would fight them in the streets, stuff like that. And so Hitler, first chance he gets, he bans the Communist Party and arrests all the communists he can find. So eventually, pretty quickly, the Reichstag, which is their, it's what they call their building, and it's what they call their parliament. They passed what's called the Enabling Act. Basically, it gave Hitler the right to make laws. So basically, it turned him into a dictator. So they're the legislative kind of arm, and they just say, whatever you say is law. The center-left party in Germany at the time was the Social Democrats. They had been in power for a while, and the Nazis and the right wing took control from the Social Democrats. And a lot of the Social Democrats voted against it. I think all of them did. You could Google it. Courageously voted against it, and many of them got sent to concentration camps. They weren't death camps yet, but they were concentration camps for political prisoners. Some of them, a couple of them escaped to France, which didn't end up helping them out in the long run. But after Hitler gets the Enabling Act, he becomes a dictator. So you have to understand the situation in Germany after World War I. It's kind of an emergency situation, kind of like in the United States, because of the Depression. So the country kind of looks to this radical outsider as a savior. He has some kooky ideas, but they think, look, maybe he'll put the kooky ideas to the side and just do some good things for Germany. I don't know a whole lot about the German politics at the time. As far as I know, it wasn't like every single person who voted for Hitler was totally on board with everything he said. A lot of them just thought he would be kind of this patriotic guy who would restore Germany's greatness or whatever, or at least get them out from under the Treaty of Versailles, which we'll talk about in a minute if you don't know what that is. So get this, there's this crisis. Get the feel of a crisis type scenario. Lots of people out of work. Germany is a mess. Hyperinflation, nothing's working. So they're looking around for someone to fix it. So people were kind of primed to give him a little extra power anyway, and he goes crazy with that. So in May of 1933, he bans all other parties. So the right-wing party's gone. Everybody's gone except the Nazi Party. So from January to May, there's no other parties allowed except the Nazis. It took them 4 or 5 months. In October of that year, he withdraws from the League of Nations, increases the size of the army, which breaks the Treaty of Versailles. So the League of Nations was like the precursor to the United Nations. It didn't really work. It had no teeth, and the United States wasn't in it, was one of the biggest problems with it. So he pulls out of that, just unilaterally. A little bit about the Treaty of Versailles, in case you don't know what it is. It's the treaty that ended World War I. Up until then, the deadliest war in the history of mankind. What happened was the Germans were starting to lose. They had been fighting principally the English, the French, and the Russians it lasted about 4 years. In the middle of World War I, the Bolsheviks, the communists, take over Russia and give Germany a huge chunk of land in order to just get out of the war. And so Germany wins against Russia. And then they keep fighting the French and the English and eventually the Americans when we get in. And the Germans are starting to lose. And some of their politicians can see the writing on the wall. The military was going to fight, I don't know if till the bitter end, but a long time. So President Wilson, our president, announces these 14 points that he thinks this is how we should run the world after the war. And a lot of it is let the people decide what their country is going to be. So don't have these big empires and all of this. Let the colonies go, all this stuff. And the Germans say, hey, that seems pretty benevolent. That seems they're not going to punish us. So they approach the Allies with a peace deal, or they go to the Allies and say, hey, let's start negotiating for peace. And they think it's going to be under those terms. But when the Versailles Conference gets going, when the peace conference gets going, the Allies just push Wilson to the side. He's frankly pretty naive about what's going to happen. He thinks he's going to go over there and, make democracy everywhere and make everything wonderful. No, the Allies wanted to screw Germany, right? And understandably so. I mean, they had been waging this apocalyptic war against them for 4 years, and Germany basically started it. It's complicated, but it's kind of Germany's fault, right? So they're bitter enemies, and they want to punish them, and that's what happens a lot of the time, and especially these European wars. They would go to war for sometimes 6 months, and then somebody would get the upper hand, and then they would just, hey, give us this, or pay us that, and then it's over. And everyone thought that's how World War I would go. No, it took a long time. It was a much bigger deal than anyone anticipated. So anyway, they want to screw Germany. And the Germans don't really have any say in the matter. So they just kind of have to sign the Treaty of Versailles and do whatever the Allies want. So the Allies pin all the blame for the war on the Germans, and they make them pay $44 million in reparations. And they bar Germany from having a navy and an air force. They can only have an army, and it can only be 100,000 people, which is barely big enough to defend Germany at the time. And the French take Alsace-Lorraine, this region in between Germany and France. The French occupied the Rhineland, which is the farthest west part of Germany for 15 years after World War I as kind of a punishment, and the idea was to keep the Germans from going to war with the French again. So you can Google Alsace-Lorraine and the Rhineland and see a little map of that. It's just, the Rhineland's just east of Belgium. So real quick with Alsace-Lorraine, it had been French territory since 1648, but there were a lot of German-speaking people in it. So in a treaty, the French got it. So then when Bismarck finally gets all the Germans together and creates Germany, the German Empire, when they wage war in the Franco-Prussian War in 1870, they wage war on France. They dominate the French and defeat them and take Alsace-Lorraine back. So that's one of the things that the French want back after World War I. So most people would agree that the Treaty of Versailles was not fair to the Germans. That is not the kind of peace that's a lasting peace. It kind of invited more fighting. It made them very bitter against the Allies. The reparations were probably too harsh, especially with the economy. The Germans could not pay those reparations. And one of the biggest problems with the treaty is that Germans after the war could tell each other, look, we didn't lose the war. It was that stupid Treaty of Versailles. We would have won the war. But the Treaty of Versailles, the Allies kind of led us astray, thinking they were going to be lenient with us, and then they screwed us over. They could tell themselves, we went there to negotiate a peace, not a surrender. And they did end up it was kind of just a surrender. Now, that they weren't going to win. The Allies were winning. The Germans were going to lose. But it's hard to tell Germans on the front lines and the generals and everybody, no, you guys are going to lose. You can see off in the distance, you're going to lose. And so they signed a treaty before everything was lost. So this is one of Hitler's arguments, and a lot of right-wing Germans' arguments was, we were stabbed in the back by politicians and Jews, and if it wasn't for the Treaty of Versailles, Germany would still be great. It wouldn't be prostrate before the Allies. We wouldn't have French soldiers on German soil. We'd have a great military. We'd still be a great power. And so that becomes one of the major causes of the right wing in Germany at the time. So a little about the Jews and the Nazis. Lots of people know a lot of stuff about this. Just real briefly, the Nazis saw the Jews as special enemies of Germany and all nation states, especially the kind of nation states that they had and still have in Europe. They used this, and they used the argument that they could have won the war if it wasn't for the Jews stabbing them in the back. And this was easy to convince young Germans, young patriotic Germans, that this is true and that this would have actually happened if it wasn't for the Jews. All right, a few things that Hitler did while first little while he was in power. I mean, this is not he's kind of being secretive for 4 years and then, no, it's right off the bat. So there's this event called the Night of the Long Knives. And Hitler had the head of the SA, which is the stormtroopers. And that didn't come from Star Wars. Stormtroopers came from the Nazis. I don't know if they invented it, but that's where it became famous. So it's kind of weird. The stormtroopers were these just fanatical Nazis. There was 400,000 of them. And they had it's kind of like a militia group today, or sometimes I describe it as kind of like the evil Boy Scouts, right? Like Boy Scouts gone wrong type thing. So they're a patriotic organization, or at least they see themselves as that. I mean, and they are, if you think about what a patriot is, it's somebody who supports their country's cause. And so they see themselves as trying to help Germany, restore Germany to greatness. And basically, it's just kind of this army of thugs that the Nazis control. They go out and do street battles with the communists. They'll go and intimidate people. It was not a good group. But anyway, he had the head of the SA, or the stormtroopers, assassinated, and some other people assassinated inside of the Nazi Party because he was worried about them challenging him. So it was a purge, right? A Stalin-style purge, not to the extent of Stalin's purges, but it was a purge to get rid of any people who might be potential rivals. So that's the Night of the Long Knives. That was in June 1934. So, what, a year and a half after he becomes chancellor? July 1934. So President Hindenburg dies. And Hindenburg was a hero of World War I. He was one of the generals who ran it. And so he was elected president. And he was still the president. But when he dies, Hitler declares himself the Führer, which just means leader. And he just says, there's no more president of Germany. That's not a thing anymore. And there's no more elections after that. They don't elect a new president. Hitler's just in charge of Germany. So in 1.5 years, he bans all opposition. He starts throwing people in concentration camps. He pulls out of the League of Nations. And he says, there's no more president and there's no more elections. I'm it. So if you're going to compare this to Trump's timeline, this would have been the equivalent of July 2018. So imagine if in the summer of 2018, Trump kills all his possible rivals in his own party, abolishes Congress and the Supreme Court, and declares himself supreme leader forever and gets rid of elections. Okay, the Nuremberg Laws, September 1935. This is 2 years and 8 months into Hitler's reign. So the Nuremberg Laws are basically race laws. They outlaw marriages between Jews and Germans because the Nazis were all about race. Everything was race to them. That's all that mattered. You could tell everything about a person by their race. So it even outlawed sex between Jews and Germans because what they wanted was to keep the German blood, quote, pure. And Jews and any, quote, inferior peoples would pollute the German nation. They stripped Jews of citizenship. They stopped Jews from working in certain professions like doctors and stuff like that. You had to get a license under these laws to verify that you were genetically fit to get married, so you wouldn't ruin the German nation. If you had hereditary illnesses, you couldn't get married because you would pass those on. So this is eugenics too. The Nazis were big on eugenics. You can go Google eugenics if you want. It's kind of engineering out of a group of people, the inferior peoples type thing. Engineering the best people, kind of. These laws were eventually applied to gypsies and blacks too, because they were racially, quote, racially suspect. So 2 years and 8 months would be like right now in President Trump's presidency, the late summer of 2019. So imagine him passing a law that banned sex between people of certain races or religions and banned certain races or religions from certain jobs, took away people's citizenship because of their race or their religion, deciding who can get married based on race or religion. Okay, that's the equivalent of that. Okay, one of the most famous things about the Nazi craziness is their concentration camps. So at first, the concentration camps were for political prisoners. They were not death camps at first. They were kind of like Russian gulags. They would just take people who didn't agree with Nazism or were potential threats or opposition and just round them up and take them to a place and hold them there. So in March 1933, 2 months after Hitler takes power, Dachau, it's not the most famous. I think it was the biggest. It's the longest lasting concentration camp. Pretty sure it's the biggest. Auschwitz might have been bigger. It doesn't matter. It's the first one. I don't mean it doesn't matter. I mean, either way, Dachau is the first one, and the SS starts it. So the SS is a smaller kind of elite, I think it was started as an elite guard for Nazi leaders, and they end up becoming the most fanatical kind of enforcers of Nazi ideology. They're very fanatical. They end up running all the concentration camps. They're sent out by Hitler to round up people who are potential problems for the Nazis. They're a smaller group than the SA, the stormtroopers, or sometimes the SA is called the brown shirts. So that's the SS. Anyway, they start at Dachau, and eventually they run all the concentration camps. So like I said, at first, the only people in these concentration camps are communists and socialists, the political prisoners. If you go to the Holocaust Museum website, and at the end of this, I'll give you all the links to the places I got this information. If you go to their website, it defines a concentration camp as a place where people are held under harsh conditions and that is outside of the legal system. They aren't charged with anything. There's no legal proceeding, no due process, no habeas corpus. So it's a kind of a secret place to take them just because they're in the way. And remember, they're not at war. There's no war going on. They're not prisoners of war. These are just people that the Nazis don't like. And they claim, there's this emergency, and so they're enemies of the state or whatever. And they just hold them there. So at first, frankly, they are kind of like the Japanese internment camps in the United States during World War II. Those Japanese didn't do anything. There were some Japanese at the beginning of World War II who left and went back to Japan. But I can't remember the numbers. It was a few thousand. So there were some who did go home and were loyal to Japan, just like there were some people of German descent who went back to Germany when Germany started fighting. And so there was some, but even if they still held some feelings about Japan, they didn't do anything. We just preempted it, was what I guess FDR was doing, and just grabbed them and said, we're not going to give you the chance to fight for Japan or to infiltrate or be spies or whatever it is. So anyway, it's kind of like that. So they weren't death camps at first. I'm not trying to justify them or anything, but let's just differentiate. They weren't death camps at first. So these camps, just remember, these started weeks after Hitler came into power. He started sending out his goons and starting to use the actual police, not just the SS, but he started using the actual police to go round people up, went door to door, rounding up political enemies. According to the Holocaust website, there are three main purposes for a concentration camp: to incarcerate security threats for as long as needed, to murder individuals or small groups of people in secret, and as forced labor camps. So as early as 1933, the year he takes over, the Gestapo, they issued what are called protective detention orders for someone who was politically dangerous. I guess they're protecting the public from them is how they justified it. These were extrajudicial, right? The courts had nothing to do with this. There was no due process. They would just grab them and say, we don't like you. We don't like what you stand for. You're going to this prison here. So Hitler in 1935 begins increasing the size of the military. So 2 years and 2 months into his presidency, he announces that he's expanding the army from the allowed under Versailles 100,000 to 480,000. And he's going to build an air force, and they start building the Navy. The Nazi argument for this was that the other countries weren't disarming. They were, France had built, the Maginot Line. They had built huge fortifications. Their army was enormous. They had been developing better tanks and planes and all this. And so their argument was, look, they're not doing it. Why should we still have to do it? So anyway, that's why they break the Treaty of Versailles. There was this movement after World War I to disarm, because a lot of the people thought that the reason World War I happened is because everybody had so many weapons. The armies had grown so powerful that once they did go to war, it was so devastating. So they said, well, let's just have people disarm. Let's have countries disarm. So they had they had one agreement where they just all agreed to never go to war again, to not use war as a tool for statecraft or whatever. And a lot of countries signed it. They also had agreements, kind of like arms control agreements, where the biggest, most powerful countries, let's say they could have 10 battleships. Then the next tier could have 5, and then the lowest tier could have 2. So like the United States and Britain could have 10, and then Japan could have 3, and France could have 5, or what, that kind of, so the ratios would stay the same. So there was no arms race. There was no point to an arms race because you weren't allowed to try and one up the next guy. It didn't really work. People cheated on it. And so it was, it's a good idea, I guess, but it didn't work. So by doing this, Hitler just throws out the Treaty of Versailles. He just says, that's not a thing anymore. That's over. And this was one of the main things that the Nazis and the right wing hated. They hated the Treaty of Versailles. They wanted to just get rid of it, so Hitler just throws it away. So now into the government under Hitler. Here's a quote from the Holocaust Museum website on the page entitled, quote, Nazi Rule. It says, in the first months of his chancellorship, Hitler began a concerted policy of synchronization, forcing organizations, political parties, and state governments into line with Nazi goals and placing them under Nazi leadership. Culture, the economy, education, and law came under greater Nazi control. Trade unions were abolished, and workers, employees, and employers were forced into Nazi organizations. By mid-July 1933, the Nazi Party was the only political party permitted in Germany. The Reichstag, the German parliament, became a rubber stamp for Hitler's dictatorship. The Führer's will became the foundation for government policy. So Hitler very early on has his cabinet declare a state of emergency, and they end freedom of the press, speech, and assembly. They just say that's no more. It's an emergency. He allowed the police to read people's mail, listen to their phone conversations, and search homes without a warrant. And that's just right off the bat. He doesn't wait around forever. He just starts doing that right when he gets into power. In March of 1933, 2 months in, they abolished state governments. So here's the deal with Germany. They used to be a whole bunch of German states, German countries. They're ethnically German. They all spoke German, but they weren't one big country. And people in Europe a lot of the time said, if the Germans ever get together, they're going to dominate Europe. And they do today, and they did once they got together, right? So when Germany gets together, it's kind of a federal, I don't know all about the first government of Germany, but these states still kind of want to hold on to a lot of control. It's even that way today in Germany. They have a federal republic. And so the states of Germany, the member states of the greater country of Germany, had a lot of power. Kind of like the United States, right? We're a federated republic. We're a federation of states. So Hitler just says, all the state governments are gone. I'm controlling everything from Berlin. And that's in March 1933. That's 2 months in. There's no squabbling. There's no fight. He's just the dictator now. So July 1933, 6 months in, he makes a deal with the Catholic Church. There's not much the Catholic Church can do to fight this Nazi regime. There's nothing really anybody in Germany can do. They just take over and terrorize everybody and just install a totalitarian government like overnight. So the Vatican signs a deal with him that if the church keeps out of politics, then the Nazis guarantee that the Catholics can worship freely. They never really honored this. They harassed the Catholics. They I don't know all about it, but I've read some things where this was not honored. But the Vatican was the first government, because the Vatican is its own country, technically. They were technically the first government to recognize Hitler's government. Okay, real quick about the Nazi police state. The Nazis used the SS, which I've described, basically as cops, as pseudo-police, right after Hitler becomes chancellor. So he can use them however he wants, to intimidate people, to rough people up, to take them to concentration camps. The rule of law has kind of gone out the window, and whatever the Nazis want is what happens. But they also used the traditional police in order to enforce Nazi ideology and to force this all on the public. So very quickly they find anybody who had spoken out against Hitler, and they're going to a concentration camp, or they kill them. So within 6 months, all opposition to Hitler is gone, or at least driven into the shadows, and everyone shuts up. They're either in concentration camps, dead, or somehow they shut up and they say Heil Hitler whenever somebody says, do you like Hitler or not? This is totalitarianism. This is how you control a populace. You don't have to actually punish all of them. You just have to make all of them scared of saying the wrong thing. And then a populace is successfully suppressed. And that only took 6 months. I don't know when it was complete, technically, but it didn't take that long. Propaganda in Nazi Germany. So the Nazis immediately take control of all the media. Any source of information, they're in control of it. Here's another quick quote from the Holocaust Memorial website. It says, newspapers, magazines, books, public meetings, and rallies, art, music, movies, and radio were all taken over by the Nazis. They also, this is the famous book burning part of it. They make lists of books that had ideas in them that were anti-German, whatever that means. And the Nazis would determine what's anti-German, I guess. So on May 10th, 1933, they gathered up thousands of books, and famously, you can see the videos of it, threw them in bonfires and burned them all. They're burning all the anti-German stuff. Schools are forced to teach Nazi propaganda. They indoctrinate the students in Nazi ideology. The boys are forced to go to the Hitler Youth, which is like Hitler Boy Scouts, kind of. I don't mean the Boy Scouts are like that, but it's like a youth movement. They wore little uniforms. They taught them how to shoot guns. They taught them how to fight. They taught them how great Hitler was. It was an indoctrination program for, frankly, the soldiers who end up fighting in World War II. They radicalized them. And if you read about D-Day, the German soldier, man for man, fought better than the Americans and the British. They were radicalized. They were fanatics. And they fought well. Because think if you were 12, from the time you were 12, told that you were going to do this great thing, and you had to go, take over Russia for living space for the German nation, but you were the generation that was going to sacrifice and make greater Germany, make Germany dominate Europe. You would be probably kind of fanatical and kind of radicalized. And the German army has always been pretty good anyway, so. And the German girls were forced to attend this thing called the League of German Girls. I don't really know much about that, but it's interesting because the communists used women in their military because they're progressive. They're looking forward to the future. We're going to create a new world. So everything old, all the old norms, all the traditions, we're throwing that all out, and we're making this new world. The Germans, a fascist, they look backward and they say, we're going to restore what was great about us. And so the Nazis would never have put women in combat. That's not a traditional value, right? So that's sometimes why you hear people say the communists are on the left and the Nazis are on the right. It's kind of not fair. The left-right thing is useful in some instances. Sometimes it breaks down. But as far as the idea of the right being traditional and the left being progressive or wanting to invent a new world, they are on the right and the left there. So now let's compare Trump and Hitler. Okay, I think I think in your head you're thinking, well, what's there to compare? What? Well, okay, just for the sake of argument, because some people are out there screaming about this, let's look at some of the things. Okay, I don't know. They both came to power through the electoral process. That's true. Hitler was an elected official at first. They were both political outsiders. Now, Hitler was less so than Trump. Trump is truly the only president who came out of nowhere. He'd never run for any political office. He'd talked about it, but he never had. And he wins. He becomes the most powerful person on earth. And he'd never done anything. He'd never done anything political before. It's weird. It's kind of an amazing little story. I don't mean amazing like it's beautiful, but it's, if you just look at it, it's, wow, that's crazy. That's never happened before in American politics. Now, you could say Eisenhower, but Eisenhower was in the military. He was in the government, right? So that's different. But it's not totally different. So with Hitler, he had been trying to get into politics for a long time, for like a decade. He'd been running for stuff. He'd been the head of the Nazi Party. So that's different. He was constantly trying to get into politics. They are both nationalists. I don't mean they were both white nationalists. Okay, that's been floating around out there too. As far as I can tell, Trump's not a white nationalist. He has no history of hobnobbing with David Duke or whatever. At least that I can find out. And there is a difference between nationalists and white nationalists. A nationalist just is a patriot. They care about their country. And a white nationalist cares about their race. So that's the difference. There's black people who are nationalists. There's Jews who are nationalists. There are all kinds of people who are nationalists. If you're a patriot and you care about your country and you care about its welfare first before other countries, not maybe at the expense of other countries, but if you're a patriot, you can be considered a nationalist. A white nationalist cares about the white nation. So that's different. That's a different thing. They care about their white race. And so Hitler was for sure a racist, white supremacist, German supremacist, right? More like a Northern European supremacist is really what he was. Here's the problem. When we talk about nations in the United States, we just use it interchangeably with the word country. And that's not really the same thing. A nation is a group of people who have a common ancestry, mostly, a common language, a common history, an area where they live and have lived for a long time, common culture, common practices. They are a nation, like the Swedes or the Greeks or the Czechs, right? The Germans were a nation. And so they created a country called Germany. So if you look at a map of Europe, most of the countries are based on nations. It's called the nation state. And so this is where the Germans are. This is their country. This is where the Czechs are, in the Czech Republic. We tried to lump them together after World War I. Oh, this is Czechoslovakia. The Czechs and the Slovaks live here. Yeah, after the Cold War, they wanted to be separate. The Czechs wanted their own country. The Slovaks wanted their own country. And so now they have their own countries. So understand the nation. We use them interchangeably in the United States because the United States is not truly a nation state. It's a nation state in the same way that it's a country and it interacts with other countries. Like Japan is a nation state. Almost everybody there is ethnically Japanese, and they have a state for themselves. That's not really the case in the United States. We don't have one whole nation. I know we call ourselves a nation, but it's not the same thing. Okay, I mean, it's debatable, right? There might be some ways that we are a nation. I kind of think we kind of are, but not like the Czechs. It's not the same thing. So just understand that we get the vernacular kind of confused. And so Hitler was for the German race, which in his mind, and to some extent is true, was the same thing as the German state. That's not the case in the United States. The closest thing we have to nations in the United States, I think, is like the Navajo. They've been in that area. That's their place. They have a common ancestry. They have a common language. They have customs. That's their place. That's not really a thing for most Americans. There isn't a place for the Jews in the United States. There might be some of them living in a place, but they haven't lived there for, 800 years, and it's not the same thing. So just try to understand that. If, maybe I'm not telling you anything you don't know, but maybe somebody out there doesn't understand that. And I think I understand it pretty well. So just speaking of nationalism for just another minute, you can be a nationalist and not a white nationalist. So Lincoln was a nationalist, for sure, right? He preserved the country. He was for the United States. FDR was a nationalist, of course. He cared about the United States over other countries. It was first on his list. Kennedy was a nationalist. Washington was the original nationalist, right? So don't be too scared of this word nationalist. It can just mean that you're for your country. Now, a lot of this in Europe, I know Macron, the president of France, came out and said, nationalism is bad, it caused World War I. And all right, that's kind of true. They kind of went overboard with the nationalism, I guess. All right, I mean, at what point is patriotism for your country bad? There's a lot of people on the political left, frankly, who don't really think we should have patriotism, that we should be more loyal to these ideals, and that we're all one people in the world and all this. I kind of think that's naive. Maybe I could be convinced otherwise, I don't know. But they have kind of this, the Beatles song, Imagine, that whole kind of, everything will be wonderful. Come on. There's countries, and people are loyal to their countries. They live in countries. That's how the world works. All right, I'll move on. Sorry. All right. Trump being a racist. Let's see what we can find here. Usually what people throw at him is the first thing he stupidly said when he announced. He said in his speech talking about illegal immigrants from Mexico, he said they're rapists, and I assume some of them are good people. Okay, I don't know if either he's just, it's a huge gaffe, or that's a window into his racist mind. I don't know. That's I thought he is doomed. Time after time he was just emerged from the ashes, right? He just shrugged these things off. It's just, politically, it's just unprecedented. He said he probably wouldn't get a fair decision out of a judge because the judge's parents, I think, were from Mexico. Okay, maybe that's a window into his racist mind. I don't know. He has said some crazy things at his rallies when he gets all riled up and trying to make people laugh or whatever. I think he said something like, we'll have the cars, they'll stop making cars in Mexico and they'll make them here and we'll use them to run over the illegals, or I don't know, you can Google it. Okay, that's crazy. Probably the most infamous one is the Chancellorsville thing. Is it Chancellorsville? The rally, I forgot to Google the name before I sat down to do this. Um, they had a rally to get rid of a statue of a Confederate general, and there was a big riot with the Antifa fighting, I don't know who, a bunch of Nazis, and somebody got run over. Some Nazi ran somebody over. And so a little while after that, he gave a press conference in the lobby of Trump Tower. And how I remember, if you can go Google it, I recommend watch the whole thing. It's about 15 minutes. Don't just listen to the clip that people took out of context. Okay, they did. If you watch the whole thing, what he said is, right or wrong, this is what he said. He said there were some people there who were just protesting they wanted to keep the statue. They were the first ones there. I think he said Proud Boys were there. And whatever you think of the Proud Boys, they're not the ones, as far as I know, who started the fight. And so they were there at first, and then the Nazis and Antifa showed up and started fighting. And so that's when he said there were good people on both sides, because he said, look, there were these people who were trying to keep the statue, and then there were these people who were trying to get rid of the statue, and then the crazies came. So I honestly don't think he meant, yeah, the Nazis were good people. I don't think, and right in the press conference, he says, no, he condemns the Nazis and the KKK. Now you might say, well, they forced him to. All right, okay, maybe, but in the same press conference, just go watch it. It's taken out of context, I think. I don't know, maybe you don't think it's taken out of context. But it seemed to me that he wasn't saying the Nazis were the good guys at that rally. Now you might be thinking I'm defending him. I'm not. I'm just trying to give an honest analysis. And that's what I saw. And then there's this so-called Muslim ban when he got into office. What he did was, there was something like 12 countries in the Middle East that were designated as sources of terrorism. The Obama administration, I guess, had dubbed them that, and they said, we need to focus on these countries. So what the Trump administration did is they just said, we're not going to let immigration in from those countries. And I don't know how long it was for. It was just for a certain amount of time. I don't think it was indefinitely. I don't think it was intended to be a long time. It was just until we can do something else. I don't know what they were going to do. And it was more like a moratorium. A moratorium is a temporary stoppage or ban on something. So if it was truly a Muslim ban, then they would have banned all Muslims from Indonesia and India and other parts of Africa and the Middle East, Europe. Right? There's Muslims. I mean, think how many Muslims. There's like, I don't know, something like 200 million Muslims in Indonesia. None of them were banned. So this wasn't truly a Muslim ban. No, I mean, the Muslim world is the Middle East. I get it. If you ban people from the Middle East, most of them, almost all of them are Muslim. So I can see why people thought it was a Muslim ban. And I don't know, maybe it was a stupid idea. That's not what I'm talking about. What I'm talking about is this like Hitler, right? Is this fairly represented as something like Hitler would do? I don't know, but I don't think it's as bad as everyone made it out to be. I don't even know if it's legal, but he didn't ban all Muslims from everywhere. So these were hotbeds of terrorism. I mean, Obama didn't do it, but Obama did designate those countries as sources of terror. So, I don't know, maybe that's just a talking point from Trump. But see, a lot of this is what Trump really meant to do because he's a secret racist. Okay, maybe. I don't know. There's no way to prove that, really. Just think about this, though. Going back to the whole, oh, Trump is Hitler. Has he done anything like the Nuremberg laws? No. No. Nothing even close to that. Is he doing anything akin to intimidating Jewish shops. No, with putting SA in front of it, right? Saying, buy German. Don't betray Germany by buying from Jews. He's not doing anything like that. Does he have an army of 400,000 thugs that are running around the country intimidating people? No. He has ICE. Okay, ICE is a legitimate law enforcement agency that gets its authority from law, right? I mean, the Congress told them they're just enforcing the law. Now, you might not like how they're enforcing the law, or Obama might have enforced it differently. Okay, but it's not his own private army of thugs. Is he using thugs to intimidate people at polling stations? No, there's no evidence of that. Can you imagine if there was any evidence of that, how that would be just all over the news? Is he sending thugs into the street to do street battles? I don't think he has anything to do with the Proud Boys to the extent that they're even doing that. I think they're the only right-wing group out there doing that, fighting Antifa or whatever. He has nothing to do with them. Now, they like Trump, but he doesn't give them marching orders. So now let's talk about the border detention centers that have been compared to concentration camps. So Nazi and communist concentration camps were for political prisoners to house dangerous people who were dangerous to the regime. And people from the country, not foreigners trying to get into the country. They were placed there indefinitely with no due process, no hope of a trial. Nobody knew they were there. There was no press coming there to look at them and say, hey, look at their plight. There were no hearings. There were no elected officials monitoring what they're doing or what's going on. Okay, so that was a Nazi concentration camp. And when you use the word concentration camp, people think of Auschwitz. They think of Dachau. They think of the killing machine at Auschwitz. You can't use the word concentration camp and just kind of throw that around as if it's... No, that means whoever works there is like an SS concentration camp guard. So that's a loaded term, and it means a death camp. It means more than a detention center, at least I think. Now, Trump didn't set these up. Obama used them. They've been around for a while. Is Obama like Hitler for detaining people at these detention centers? I don't think anyone would ever say that. So you can't even, maybe you can blame Trump for some policy he did. That whole policy of putting kids in cages and separating them from their parents, that happened under Obama too. Now, I don't know if Trump did it more. I've heard that. Maybe he did. But the fact that it happened under Obama too, and maybe under Bush, I don't know. Okay, if Trump's doing it and he's like Hitler, and Obama did it, is he like Hitler? Then this whole thing, I mean, come on, let's be grown up about this. And here's the deal. Why are those people in those detention centers? Because they tried to come into the country without permission. And they were caught by the border guards, and now they're going to get due process. Are they asylum seekers? Should they get kicked out? All that. He's not rounding citizens up and keeping them in jail somewhere because they don't like him or because they're not going to vote for him. That's not what's going on. There's no instances of that I can find. Go find one. It'd be all over the news. These are foreign nationals. These are aliens coming to this country without permission, and our border guards are detaining them. So there's no comparison. The only comparison is that there's, yes, a large group of people concentrated in an area. Okay, that's the only way they're similar. And calling these things concentration camps minimizes the horror of the Holocaust, frankly. You're kind of minimizing what happened at Auschwitz and Dachau and all those horrible places by calling what's happening at these places the same thing. The Night of the Long Knives. Has Trump done anything even close to that? Any purges? Nothing. There's no purges. Okay, maybe the whole Epstein guy who hanged himself or whatever I don't know, maybe behind the scenes, who knows? But there's been no purges that we have any evidence of at all. On to the totalitarian rule of the Nazis. Has Trump tried to take over society like the Nazis did? Has he taken over education? Not in the least. People in education hate Trump. Everyone in education hates Trump. Has he tried to dominate any private institutions and make them all become Republican and intimidate them into joining the Republican Party? No. Now, okay, maybe you could say he's trying to push companies around, telling them to come back from China. All right, okay, but is that on the same level as the totalitarian tactics of the Nazi Party? No, it's not. It's just kind of maybe a little bit authoritarian president. FDR did some of the same kind of things, okay? Has he abolished state governments? Not even close. Has he muzzled the press or actually really intimidated them? No. Has he forced them to give his talking points? Now, I know Fox News likes him and he appears on what is it called? Whatever their morning show is. Okay, fine. All the other media stations hate Trump, and it's just 24/7 Trump bashing. Would Hitler have ever tolerated any of that? No. There's no comparison there at all. So when people say he's trying to silence the media, where and how? He's not. Right? He kicked that one guy out for not shutting up and grabbing that mic from that girl in a press conference. Wow, that's so totalitarian. He's like Hitler. That's nothing like Hitler. No. Okay? And that guy was gone for like 2 days and then he came back. So, come on. This is ridiculous. It's just... Okay, the police state. Is he using the police to try to control society? Has he hijacked the FBI and the ATF and local police forces? Has he turned the CIA into the Gestapo? No. He has turned ICE loose, I guess, a little bit. He has turned the Border Patrol, I guess, as loose as they can be turned. They have more of a kind of a passive role than ICE does. But he has kind of turned them loose a little bit. But remember that a couple weeks ago, there was a raid on a meatpacking plant or something? Half of those people got let go because I guess they didn't have any other guardians to watch out for their kids. They let like half of them go. They're illegal aliens. And they just said, all right, well, you have a kid here. Okay, you go back into the populace. So this is not the Gestapo. I'm not saying there's no repercussions to it. I'm not saying it's not hard for people. But you can't compare it to the Nazis. It's ridiculous to compare it to the Nazis. Is he using the police force to go round up his political opposition or intimidate them in any way? Is there anyone who hates Trump who's afraid to say it in public? Where? If anything, it's the opposite. You'll be called a racist if you like Trump, right? I mean, I don't know, maybe in some quarters people are scared to say they hate Trump, but I haven't seen that. Think about this. Think about the Mueller probe. That went on for 2 years? Would Hitler have tolerated anything ever even close to that? No. No, there were no investigations into Hitler while he was in power. No. So, I mean, Here's one, breaking treaties. So Hitler broke the Treaty of Versailles. He just backed Germany out of it and said, we're not doing this anymore. This sucks for Germany, so we're out. And he quadrupled the size of the army, created an air force and a navy, and he reoccupied the Rhineland. So here are two things Trump did. He didn't scrap the Paris Accord because a lot of countries bought into it. He just removed the United States from it. And he scrapped our part in the Iran deal, the nuclear deal with Iran. There's still other countries that are signatories to it, but we're the heavyweight, and what we do matters more than anyone else. And so he just took us out of those. Now you might say, well, he's like Hitler, he's scrapping treaties. Well, those two were executive agreements. Those were not treaties. A treaty, a legal treaty that has the force of law, has to go through the Senate, and it has to get a 2/3 vote in the Senate. Obama knew he was never going to get that, so he just made an executive agreement. Like, these come from the Cold War. Maybe they happened before, but I think during the Cold War is when they got big. So the president would go just make an agreement with a country because he had to for the sake of the Cold War. And so Obama just said, it's an executive agreement. I'm signing the United States up for this. And with an executive agreement, which I think is kind of unconstitutional because it just bypasses the treaty provision, it says right in the Constitution, the president negotiates treaties, and then the Senate has to ratify them by a 2/3 vote. We don't have to obey those treaties. I mean, that's kind of radical, but I mean, what? This is not how the Constitution works. So anyway, when Trump gets in, he just says, you know what? I'm the new executive. Screw those treaties. Screw those agreements. We're not part of that anymore. So that's not really the same thing as the Treaty of Versailles. The government of the United States is not the president. It's the president and the Congress and the Supreme Court. And the other branch of the United States government did not agree that that was a treaty. And so Trump just got out of it. And he got out of the Iran deal. And so that's his prerogative as president. You might not agree. And maybe it was stupid. I don't really know what was in the Iran deal. And I don't know. Some of it seemed stupid. Some of the Paris Accord seemed stupid. But he's not without his bounds to do that. I don't know. I mean, the whole Versailles thing, I don't think that was really that radical of Hitler to do either, but it was a treaty that he broke. So there you go. There's the comparison. So here's some ways that they're kind of similar. They both want to increase the military strength of their country. And that's kind of a traditional thing for American presidents to do. And it's a traditional thing for Germans. They're kind of a militaristic society. They are both nationalists. Okay, they just are. They both want their countries to be strong, and there is this element at least in their campaigning and in their actions where they think they're making their country great again, right? They're restoring their country to greatness. And so I don't think Trump backing out of these executive agreements is really that outrageous. I kind of think it's more outrageous to get into them and bypass the Senate. Now, I don't know, maybe the way the country works now, it's just impossible to get the Senate to ever ratify a treaty. But I don't like this authoritarian streak by all presidents in the last, I don't know, however long, 4, 5, or 6 presidents. I don't like that. We need to follow the Constitution or change the Constitution and then still follow it. We shouldn't just say, it doesn't really work, so I'm just going to do whatever the heck I want. No. That's scary to me. All right, real quick, the propaganda. Did Trump take over all the news outlets and all the sources of information? Not by any stretch. He basically has Twitter. He has Twitter and some friends on Fox News and his website. and like Rush Limbaugh and, right-wing talk radio. That's it. So that's nothing like the Nazis. So, they're both political outsiders. They both told everyone they're going to fix the country and make their countries great again. They're both nationalists. And that's kind of it. That's the only similarities I can see. They're both kind of idiots, right? I mean, Trump says this is the stupidest stuff. And so, Hitler wasn't, everyone thinks Hitler was like this genius. I guess he's kind of smart. He's not, he's not Bismarck. He's not Lincoln. He's not a genius. He's just kind of this radical guy from like this militia group who kind of hijacked Germany. Okay? All of the things I just listed, you could say the same thing, not all the things, but in that most recent list. The nationalists, they're trying to make their country great, all that. You could say the same thing about FDR. You could say the same thing about Reagan. You could say the same thing about Lincoln. In those ways, Hitler, Trump, and all these guys are similar. So this comparison to Hitler is just stupid. Now, I remember, I admit, when I first saw these rallies, I thought, this is weird. There's all these people in there chanting, and then every once in a while somebody gets punched in the face or whatever. And that was kind of weird. But it didn't turn into a Nazi rally. I mean, I don't see any signs of any of this stuff happening. Now, you might say, well, when he gets reelected, or if he does, then he'll... Okay, but look how quickly Hitler did all that stuff. So, I mean, I don't know. I'm not saying he's a great guy, whatever. Just the comparison to Hitler is just stupid. I'm sorry. It's stupid. So here are the sources I used for this podcast. The Open University, the webpage that it was entitled Hitler's Rise and Fall Timeline. The website for that one is open.ac.uk. The next one is the Holocaust Encyclopedia, United States Holocaust Memorial Museum. The website is encyclopedia.ushmm.org. The next one is United Press International, UPI.com, and the article was Hitler Orders Military Conscription in Germany. Another website, history.com, the page for This Day in History, March 7th. I used Wikipedia a little bit. I used a website called timeanddate.com. It's like a calculator for days because I didn't want to count out the months. I just used a website real quick. The other thing is, I think the best documentary for the rise of Hitler, I mean, you've probably seen maybe 1 million documentaries about the Holocaust and World War II, but there's a really good documentary about the rise of Hitler. It's by National Geographic, and it's called Apocalypse, The Rise of Hitler. It's all original video. It's in color. It's colorized. I don't know if it was originally in color. It gives you a really good feel for how he came to power. Thank you for listening.